Hello and welcome back. This is video number 3 in the tutorial series and we'll be looking at the user interface. Hopefully you've looked over video 1 and 2 where we had a quick look at what Blender's capable of doing in experienced hands and also how to load Blender onto your computer. I'm currently sitting in the 3D window and will possibly be getting in the way as we start talking about the different tools and elements around the view that is presented to you when you first open Blender. So I'll remove myself from the video and we'll start talking first of all about the toolbar. The toolbar is located on the left hand side of the 3D viewport and gives you a visual indication of the tools using icons. There's lots of ways to do things in Blender, and that includes both icons, so you can use the mouse to activate a tool, or shortcut keys, or a menu system. But the toolbar locates the icons down the left hand side. If it's in the way and you want to move the icons, you can either drag the toolbar out and they'll stack into 2 rows and that clears the viewport below it, or you can drag, if you just click to the right and get the double arrows to the right of the toolbar, you can drag it to the left completely and it takes it out of screen to clear the 3D viewport. But when it clears it out of the screen, it leaves a very small triangle on the side of the viewport, and if you click on that triangle it will come back out in the last state that it left you in. If it's not clear to you when you first start what the icons mean, Blender's included an option. If you drag it further out, the icons will then have the name alongside them. And in any of the states, if you hang the mouse over one of the icons or one of the names, a tooltip will pop out and tell you the shortcut that's used to bring that icon into operation. So if you pressed shift spacebar, it opens the toolbox menu, but wherever the mouse is located on the screen. Or with rotate, if you just hang over there, it gives you the other shortcut, which is just R, and you can press R on the keypad and on the keypad, and it will put it into rotate mode. So there's many ways to do things within Blender, but one of the useful things is having the names of the icons alongside them, and these icons will change depending on what operation you're doing within the viewport. We'll come on to the mode in a minute, but if you change to edit mode, you'll see there's a lot more tools available to you when you're editing a model than there is when you're in object mode, which is the mode where you move a model around the screen. Besides using the mouse to resize the toolbar into either single row, double row or icons with names, you can also use the shortcut key T to toggle the toolbar into and out of view. Sitting above the toolbox at the top of the 3D window is the mode drop-down. I previously quickly mentioned object and edit mode. It comes as standard when you first get Blender in object mode. If you left mouse button click to select the cube as an example, in object mode you can move the cube around the screen either using the widgets or using keyboard shortcuts, so grab to move, etc. In edit mode you then open the object up to be edited and changed. So as a cube at the moment, once you go into edit mode, it changes from just the basic cube shape of lines and faces to having vertices on the corners and edges highlighted around the cube, and opens up a lot more tools. It's in edit mode where you actually create the models, and object mode is where you move the models around the screen. There's other modes in there as well, but when you're learning, it's object mode and edit mode are the two most important. The other modes in the drop-down are sculpt mode, where you can use the cursor almost like a palette knife that applies clay to a model or takes clay away from a model. Much more organic way of creating a model, but with a much less structured mesh that needs to be topologized back to a mesh that's useful and much less vertices. And then there's Vertex paint, weight paint and texture paint, which are all used to do with shading and animation, which become more advanced. And really, when you first learn, it's object mode and edit mode. And between those two modes, you can press tab on the keyboard and it'll switch you between object and edit mode. To the right of the object mode drop down, you've got the 3D viewports menu, and these give you similar options to the options that you get in the toolbar. There's more of them, but presented in a menu format. The beauty of this again is that most of the options that you've got to carry out operations, if you want to, in the viewport, switch to the camera view, it gives you the shortcut key again, and we'll cover that in a later video. But it's always worth knowing if you're struggling to remember the shortcut key on how to do something. The menu system is a great place to go and look, as it gives you most of the shortcuts. There's far more options in the menu than what is just displayed within the toolbar, and as I say, it's something that as we work through the tutorials, you'll get to see many more of them in use. There's lots and lots of options, and again, when you tab into edit mode, the menu will change again with even more options, because there are far more tools in edit mode than there are in object mode. And to the left of the menu, when you go into edit mode, you get the selection type options. So you can either choose to select the vertex or an edge or a face on the model. So in vertex select, when you left mouse button click over a vertex, only that one vertex is selected. Edge select now just has the edge option to select edges around the model. And the face select allows you to select the complete face. And again, the next video will go into more detail on this. On the right hand side of the 3D viewport's main window, you have a number of drop downs. The first one of these is the object type visibility, and this gives you an opportunity to remove different objects from the scene while you're working on other types of objects. So if you was working on, say, a curve object, you could remove the mesh objects from the scene that are around it, possibly blocking your ability to view what you was working on and the object you were working on. So it's just a quick and easy way to add and remove objects from the scene. Next to that is the gizmo visibility, and again, the gizmos, the little helper widgets that come with some of the tools. So if you wanted to always have the move widget visible on an object, you just have to select it in here, and you can build all the different widgets and gizmos that will become more apparent as we work through the tutorials, what they do, whether you want to work with the gizmos or whether you want to work with the traditional shortcut keys. But it gives you an option to have them permanently on there rather than having to select the tools from the toolbar. Next to that is the viewport overlays, and these are things like the grids, the floor grid, the axes can be displayed or not displayed and you'll build up a preference to how you like to work, and then you can change which of the overlays you keep on the screen. And again, if you go into edit mode and then go back into the overlays, you'll see there's an awful lot more available to you to help with the tools and various aspects of altering the model rather than just moving the model around the screen as you do in object mode. Next to that, just tab back into object mode. Next to that is the X-ray or the visibility, and it allows you to see the back of the model. It's not too clear with this colour scheme, but if you tab into edit mode with everything selected, you can see in X-ray mode, you can see the back faces, edges and vertices as well as just the front ones. And then next to that, you've got the shading options, which allow you to change how the viewport is displayed, whether it's just the standard studio, or metcaps give you a range of different views to change the lighting and appearance of how you're modelling. It sometimes can make it easier to see cavities within a model, but again, it becomes down to personal choice how you find you see the models as you're working within Blender. And just below that is the axis, which shows you which direction the display is pointing. So you've got your X, Y and Z axis, and again we'll go more into moving and the coordinate system in a future video. But if you press the middle mouse button with Blender, I'll just tab out of edit mode again. If you press the middle mouse button and rotate the screen around, so you can go into different directions, you'll see in the top corner the axis indicator is always showing you which way the screen is pointing. So very useful to try and keep yourself organised in whether you want to move in the X, Y or Z axis when you're modelling. Below the axis indicator, you've got 4 small icons, and the first one is the zoom. So if you click on that and move the mouse, you can zoom in or out depending on whether you're pulling or pushing the mouse in one or another direction. Below that, you've got the move the view. So if you click on that and hold the left mouse button, click and hold, and you can move around the view using that option. Or if you toggle the camera view, it'll take you to what the camera is seeing. That would be what you output as a render, and toggling back to the previous view. And below that, you've got either perspective or orthographic views, and again they'll become more apparent in future videos. You may also have noticed on the right hand side a small triangle or arrow right on the edge of the window, very similar to the triangle or arrow that was displayed when the toolbar on the other side of the window was completely collapsed. And that's signifying there's another panel under the right hand side. So if you click on that arrow, it opens the transform panel, and this panel gives all of the locations, rotation, scales, the numerical position of where an object is in the 3D space, whichever's selected. To demonstrate, if you press the G key and move the cube, you can see the locations being updated as the cube's moved around. It's extremely useful for knowing where you are in 3D space, and also if you're looking to do precision modelling in edit mode, you can position every vertex within sub-micron accuracy if you want to within the 3D display, meaning the models that you create are dimensionally as accurate as any model that could be recreated in a machine shop. You can collapse the transform panel like the toolbox just by clicking the edge and dragging it out of view to give you more space, or you can use the N key as the shortcut to open and collapse the panel. So they're the objects within the 3D view. Above the 3D view, you've got the header bar. The header bar, every window has a header bar, and contained in that on the left-hand corner is the window type. And we're currently in 3D Viewport, but there are all sorts of different window types that you can change the 3D window to, and various different types of editors that we will go through as part of the modelling process. As we start to build models, we'll look more and more at what the different window types are. To the right of the editor type, you've got the tool options. So we're in Select Tool, and it gives you the options of whether you just select individual items, or whether you start adding to a selection or subtracting from a selection. So there's various selection options displayed there. And then in the centre of the 3D Viewport's header bar, you have a number of drop-downs, and these relate to the transform orientation, which is how or what axis you align to when you're moving and rotating objects. It's much easier to explain when we're modelling than just on a blank canvas like this. Next to that is the pivot point, and this allows you to choose what you use for a pivot point. So normally the origin of the object, which is the centre point of the object, or where the object is referenced, is used, but you have the option of the 3D cursor or individual elements of an object can be transformed separately, independent to each other. And then you have the snap menu for snapping vertices or objects together in different ways. Very powerful tool once you've learned how to use it. And next to that, we have the proportional editing tool used in modelling for affecting vertices around those that you have selected, and will become more apparent as we work through different tutorials. On the right hand side of the Viewport's header bar, you have some options where you can transform or move only certain elements of the object. So like the origin we mentioned just is the centre point of the object. You have the option of moving just the origin rather than the object. So now the vertex is placed outside and the origin isn't central to the model, but you would position it in object mode by the position of the origin. Sounds complex. It'll get easier to understand as we go through some modelling tutorials. So that's all of the objects within the 3D Viewport. We'll move on to the other areas around it and give a very brief overview of what the other windows are and do. Sitting above the 3D Viewport, you have the top bar, and on the left hand side of the top bar are the usual program menus that you would expect in most programs. So the file menu is open and all the regular file things. There's one or two different, like append and import and export of different type of 3D data files, but they'll be covered again in a little bit more depth as we go deeper into the program. The edit menu is very similar to most other edit menus. You have a new one which is render, and this gives you the access to render out either a single image or an animation from the model or animations that you're creating within the Blender file, or you can just render out the audio if you're using audio within the animations that you're creating. And then you have the window and the help again, like most other programs. To the right of the menu, you have the workspaces that we looked at in the last video, and each workspace lays out the windows that we saw, the different types of windows that any window can be changed to using the window type button. But each of the workspaces have the windows laid out in a more functional way for the type of work that the workspaces are intended for. And then to the right of the work spaces, we have a drop down for scenes, and the 3D viewport is the virtual 3D world, which is a scene within the Blender file. But you can name multiple scenes and have different 3D worlds that are used together to create the final output if you're doing very complex video editing and what have you, using 3D models within the Blender workspace area. And then to the right of the scenes you have view layers, which are effectively the render layers that were in the older versions of Blender. And this is where you can set up what elements of the render or what elements of the scene are rendered out from different collections and view layers. So it's an organisational aid, but for the whole of the Blender program, not just for the window you're working in. Below the top bar on the right hand side is the outliner, and this gives you a traditional type file tree for the layout of the objects within the Blender scene. Again, extremely powerful tool to help organise the scene. You can rename each of the different objects within the workspace that you're working on and organise them together in different collections. Can be complicated at first, but it becomes very straightforward once you've done it a few times, and again covered in future tutorials. And below the outliner is the properties window, and this window gives you access to all of the different properties. So each of the windows on the left hand side cover different areas of the program. So you've got the render settings to set up how you're going to render out the images that you're creating within the 3D space. The output settings set the resolutions and various aspects of what file format you want to outset in. Layers sets up the different layers that you can output into the view layer or in using collections, and different types of passes. So the depth of field, there's a whole range of different emissions, shadow passes, mist, normal passes, and various other ones that you can render out, not just the finished scene. And then we have the scene itself, the settings for that, which can include the units that are used. At the moment we're talking about the standard setup for Blender, which is in metric, but the units can be changed. And then below that we've got the world setting of setting up the world, so it's not just a grey area with a grid, but you can set up a sky, HDRI maps, all sorts of different backgrounds can be used to set up the world and make the output render much more appealing than you would do by just using the standard scene that was there. Then move on to the objects and details about the objects. Modifiers we'll come on to in modelling, but it's how you modify a mesh without destructively changing it. And then you're on to things like physics and materials. So there's an awful lot of information contained within the properties window that you need to familiarise yourself with over time. But the easy thing is to start off with one method, and I've always suggested people start by modelling, because if you can't model, you can't create anything of your own unique items. With Blender, you're then reliant on buying models from others and just building them together within the 3D space after you've imported them into Blender. And to the bottom left, you've got the which just extend up, you've got the timeline, and if you're doing animations, this gives you some visualization of where you are along the timeline of the animation and gives you your normal play and pause and standard buttons that you'd use in many other programs. It's a lot more powerful than that. Once you start setting up keyframes, they can be viewed in there, but there's other animation windows which are laid out much better for that, but it does give you, as you're modelling, what happens if the model's used in an animation and what changes are shown along the timeline. At the very bottom of the screen is the status bar, and this shows information about what can be done with the tools you're using at the time on the screen. So you have things like mouse button clicks or shortcuts that can be used for different operations for the tool you're using. If you right click on the status bar, you can add things to it. So the scene statistics, how many vertices and faces are used within the object that's selected, will show on the right hand side. It's quite useful when you're modelling to keep track of what you're doing. Well, that took quite a bit longer than I expected it to, but there's an awful lot packed away on Blender's default screen. And just to give you that brief description, has taken almost 25 minutes, possibly a little longer. I was expecting around 10 minutes when I first started the recording. But it does show what a big program Blender is, and you will need to familiarise yourself over time with an awful lot of the controls that are within Blender. Hopefully you found it interesting, and some of the snippets that I've been through and some of the controls and buttons you'll find useful as you go on to dig deeper into Blender and learn more from the future tutorials. I'd just like to finish by saying that one of the reasons for doing these fairly in-depth tutorials that are structured so you go through a learning process rather than just have random tutorials of some of the different features is when I first started using Blender, I was doing fairly advanced 3D CAD solids modelling and was an advanced SolidWorks user, designing building systems for cladding, chimneys and various other things. And I was looking for something more artistic to use within the work. And I just happened to stumble on Blender not long after it had been released as open source. The evening I saw it, I downloaded it, and for the whole of that evening, all I managed to do was rotate the cube around the screen, or just roll the 3D view around the screen with the middle mouse button. That went on for another couple of nights until I found the tab key, and the only thing that got me really up to speed with what mesh modelling is, I thought I knew 3D modelling, but CAD is completely different to mesh modelling. And what got me up to speed was I managed to find a copy of the Blender 2.3 guide in a London bookshop, and that really opened the door for me when it came to understanding modelling. And then when I applied the principles I was using with CAD to what Blender's 3D engine could do, it became a really useful package, which is when I released the 2.9's precision modelling guide out to the community. The reason for doing these tutorials was I struggled. There wasn't a lot out there at first, and now there's lots of information out there. But a friend of mine, the middle of last year, 2020, asked if there was a good program where his daughter could learn to do architectural type work and design work for her final school years. And I mentioned I use Blender, I've mentioned it before to him, and she should take a look at it. And they went through the process and downloaded Blender 2.8 and had exactly the same problem, that you're presented with a 3D cube on the screen and you have to dig really deep to find some actual information about what you're doing the first time you see the program. So 17 years on, people are still having the same problem. So hopefully I'll be able to build a series of tutorials. I'll try and keep them a lot briefer than this one because this has run longer than I wanted it to. And hopefully you'll get some useful information and understand what you're doing with the program as you progress on and learn. Thanks for watching this, and the next one will be out hopefully not too long from now.